Welcome to Pitch It To Me podcast, a show about the subjective past, present, and potential future of Flesh and Blood design. Today's episode will be about how much value each card can provide. You can find us across all socials such as Bluesky and Instagram at Pitch It To Me podcast. I'm Clark.
I'm Joel.
And I'm Fuzzy.
Welcome to this week's episode of Pitch It To Me podcast. We're recording this far in advance because me and Joel have a really busy April. We're going to be doing a lot of flying, huh, buddy?
Yeah. I think I'm traveling for 2/3 of April right now.
And I'm traveling for at least half of April. Both of us are going to PT London. You, because you're goated and you got an invite.
That's true. I
and
won't
me,
argue.
because I have a friend who lives in Europe, Itai, and I love flying out there to visit him every so often. And with PT London, it was a good excuse to kind of do a little double dip. So we're going to go over to do some PT London, meet up with him in London, and then go to Italy. And then I'm going to be vacationing in Italy for a week.
Man.
Damn. I'll just be manning down the fort here in Long Beach, California.
Fuzzy's going to be doing all this administrative work while I slack off and Joel does his job.
Yeah. I think I'm going to be like editing podcast episodes.
Yeah.
While you guys are on vacation.
Yeah.
So we expect this to be coming out sometime in April. Maybe it'll make it all the way to May, but we're recording it here at the end of March.
So how about that spoiler, huh?
How about those spoilers for High Seas?
Yeah, if we sound
Wow.
excited, it's because we're writing the high from the set announcement. You guys are like, that's old news, but we're still pretty excited for it.
Yeah, but that new stuff that they just revealed, crazy though,
I know, right? Wow.
Yeah, our audience gets to live in the future where they've surely got more spoilers.
No, we're all talking about the exact same thing that everybody is very aware of right now.
So with this schedule, we wanted to record something that's very fundamental to the game, something that's interesting no matter when it comes out. And we picked card evaluation and the worth of a card in Flesh and Blood.
Mm-hmm. And before we get into it, be sure to let us know what card you think bends the value of the card the most, either in the YouTube comments or come to our Discord and check it out. We also are the only place where you can get high seas spoilers, so be sure to join.
Yeah, you got to join before the High Seas spoilers start.
Yeah.
And like real properly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, this episode's about what's the value of a card. If something says draw a card or discard a card or banish a card from hand, how much value is that giving you in the game? We Flesh and Blood gamers, we like to codify everything into points, right?
Yeah, and yet when we talk about cards themselves and the very nebulous concept of them, there very often isn't a point value immediately associated with that, or it's very contextual. Mm-hmm. And so we'll be diving into that and trying to pick apart the different contexts that may change that value, but also establishing a baseline, which is going to lead us right into Red Pitch with Fuzzy.
Yeah, so I'm certainly not treading new ground here. I think this is the common mnemonic, like memory trick that players use when they're trying to think about how important it is for me to draw this card. How important is it for my opponent to draw this card? And I feel like the best way to frame this question is to imagine your opponent just played Snatch. It's coming at you. You only have 3 blocks and 2 blocks in hand.
Oh no.
How much are you going to give to block this Snatch? Is it worth it to throw not just 1 card, but 2 cards in front of it? The first card is going to give you 3 block, right? Mm-hmm. But then the next card is going to be over blocking. That's inefficient, but I can't let them have the Snatch, right? There's something I'm losing either way. So it's important to know, how important is it that I block this Snatch? How important is it that I keep my own cards in hand? How much of the cards that I have in hand are easy to evaluate, right? I can see what they do. But the mystery card that my opponent draws, that I might not even be aware of what exactly it is until turns down the line, that's a very open question that I think is important for all Flesh and Blood players to consider, because it's something that you might be faced with in the future.
Mm-hmm. And consider this other mnemonic: no blocks, no bitches. So you don't even have to consider the point differential. Just do more damage to them.
It's very tempting, right?
Yeah.
It's how a lot of new players first engage with the game, right? This is such a complex topic. For a lot of new players, it's better to just stick them on like a really aggressive aggro deck and just be like, throw all the numbers at their face, just focus on sequencing your attacks, and you can worry about blocking later.
Yeah. And I think the baseline that we often default to is that a card is worth 3 points. 3 points for a card. We see this design reflected in the fact that like a good blocking card blocks for 3, right? There are cards that can block for more, but by default, like 3 is the good number.
Yeah.
If a card is going to pitch, you want it to be pitching for 3 points of value, right? Blues are the cards we want to be pitching with. If I play a card that has go again and doesn't cost anything, like I'm not putting any extra resources into the card, I'm just playing it for the value of the card itself, that card is probably a 0 for 3 go again, right?
Yeah.
Like head jab. It's such a quintessential baseline that we give it the nickname head jab, even though it's a ninja card. It's not even a generic card.
Zap is lightning head jab. We ignore the fact that it has 0 block because it generates that 3 offensive go again value.
Yeah.
Or even other staples like Command and Conquer. It's a 2 for 6 with all this other number stapled on it, but a lot of the times when you play it, you pitch a card to play a card, and then the opponent blocks with 2 cards.
So it's 2 head jabs in a trench coat.
Very much so.
Yeah, like if you ignore the on-hit value from Command and Conquer, which granted, that's a huge amount of value, but the baseline for the stats is it's a 2 for 6 no go again. So 2 of that value came from the resources you pitched, and 1 of that value came from the action point you spent. So the card itself, Command and Conquer, is giving you 3 points of offensive value that you're coupling with your other resources going into it. That Command and Conquer, again, not the on hit, which is a lot of value, but the attack value of the Command and Conquer was 3 points from the card itself. And like in this hypothetical world, there would be other ways to spend those resources to get 2 points, or another way to spend your action point to get a point of value. But that seems to be how LSS has designed the game to be, that a card is going to give you 3 points of value. Now, this is almost in an ideal situation. There are lots of times where you're not going to be able to pitch a card for 3 points because you have to pitch a yellow or, God forbid, a red. Or you're not able to spend all the resources that you pitched. If I pitch a blue to play Command and Conquer, it doesn't really feel like I'm getting my full value because I wasted a resource. I spent my action point, but I didn't get a full 7, you know?
It's sort of like you were saying, Fuzzy, of like we expect 12 value on a turn with 3 points of value per card. But if you end up not having the action points to realize that, then you didn't get to that 12 value marker that you're kind of hunting for.
Absolutely. And hopefully maybe in that scenario, I could have blocked with some of those cards, and hopefully they were blocking for at least 3. But again, there's lots of times where like that option isn't available to me.
Yeah, a lot of the times, Joel, we've joked that like warriors just want everybody blocking with 2 cards and then attacking with 2 cards. So it's like I blocked 6 and then I throw 7, and then my opponent blocked 6 on that 7 to take 1 damage, but then they threw 7 at me, so I blocked 6 and took 1 damage. And then and you just repeat ad infinitum, and that's how warriors are trying to play the game.
Ugh. Just peak.
Just 1
Peak
damage
fab.
leak, 1 damage leak, 1 damage leak, 1 damage leak.
I mean,
back and forth.
Technically, I'm blocking with Valiant Dinos. I'm getting 7 points.
Right. And then that's what breaks the whole deadlock.
Yeah, yep.
But there's also the other direction where there are many times in the game where you can get more than 3 points of value for your cards. You know, I'm able to find synergies that are able to exceed that point value. Like if I play a single snatch and that snatch hits, I'm getting more than 4 points right away because I was able to draw a card on top of it.
Oh.
Yeah.
But how much did that card get me?
We initially sort of talked about this in our delayed value, right? With Snatch specifically and other Ponder tokens being able to draw a card.
Yeah, if we think a card being worth 3 if I pitch it, ideally, 3 if I block with it, ideally, hopefully 3 if I play it offensively. But if I remove some of those options, is a card still worth 3 points? Like the Ponder token really exemplifies that. If I Ponder token into a red, I probably am going to get at least 3 points of value for that card. If I Ponder token into a Sink Below, a 0 for 4 D-React, it should be really easy for me to get 4 points of value from that D-React. But if I Ponder into a blue, I might only get 1 or 2 points of value from that blue. Or worse, it'll gum up my arsenal and fuck over my entire game plan because I can't get it out of arsenal, you know?
True.
I might get 0 points if I decide not to arsenal the card after pondering.
Yeah.
I also want to take the other perspective and think about your opponent. How scared are you of your opponent's cards? Are you worried about them being like 3 points each? If somebody's holding a 4-card hand, are you like, okay, each of those cards is scary, worth 3 points? It doesn't really work like that because I think in Flesh and Blood, especially when somebody makes a decision not to block you, a 5-card hand is more than 3 points scary compared to a 4-card hand. which is more than 3 points scarier than a 3-card hand, you know?
Yeah, because we're not playing head jab the game.
Right.
It is far more complex than that. The more cards you have in hand, the larger the value you'll be able to generate with those cards.
Like with Zen meta, Zen was this hyper aggro deck where you just like, God forbid, you did not want Zen to keep a full 5 cards in hand, or even if they add a chi on top of that, right? Like with the Traverse, it's a nightmare. So you could play cards like Weakest Link and Erase Face. And if you play Erase Face going in 2 for 6, maybe that's your entire turn. You pitch a card to play Erase Face. You're attacking for 6, and they are putting 2 cards to block in front of it. All you've done is gotten 3 points out of each of your cards, and your opponent has gotten 3 points out of each of their cards. But yet, because of what Zen is trying to do, you have actually slowed his turn down dramatically, and you've put his hand at a much less scary position where you only have to worry about 3 cards coming back at you instead of 5.
It's a lot like Aurora looking at their Arc Lightning turn. The more cards you can take out of their hand for their Arc Lightning turn, the worse that Arc Lightning becomes because it gets 1 additional value for every single go again. In fact, I've noticed that a lot of Majestics kind of have that ability, right? Viserai was also built around this concept. The more cards the Viserai is able to keep in hand, the more that he'll just add +1 onto all those cards.
Right.
So rather than the expected 3 value, it was 4 value.
Right. In Flesh and Blood, especially with aggro decks, there's often multiplicative value that comes from your cards. It's not just linear. We're not adding 3 + 3 + 3. It might be like 2 + 1 times however many cards I have in hand. There's a multiplicative aspect to the cards. Sometimes that can be flipped on its head if you're going up against, like, say, a Guardian. Now, Guardian can also get a lot of value out of a 4 or 5 card hand, especially Bravo with his dominated crush effects. But like Victor, I would be a lot less worried about if they have a 5 card hand compared to a 4 card hand. I don't think the 5th card for Victor is going to actually help them that much. So I'm a lot more okay with like letting them have some draw effects if it comes up, or it's not as important for me to throw disruption, especially because Victor gets a lot of value out of blocking, right? Mm-hmm. When he has his really scary above rate, above 3 points cards, they're often like trounce effects or test of strength.
Yeah, Victor is known for having a very high average value on his turns. Like, I've had Victor games where my average value per turn is in 18 or 20, like going well above that 12 expected value. But that's because I'm generating it on defense and offense with that extra draw that I'm getting off of generating the gold from my block cards. If the opponent just sort of arsenals a card and passes, that can put me as the victor in a very bad spot where I'm not able to realize that extra value. So the value is oftentimes generated on offense and defense.
And speaking of arsenaling, I've found some of my favorite plays are when I have very flexible attacks where I can get 3 value out of them anytime I want. But waiting to find those multiplicative synergies can be really rewarding. Like in Zen especially, cards like 100 wins. If I have a single 100 wins in my hand that has nothing to do with like the rest of my hand, then I can very easily play it and still do the rest of my hand the same way that my hand would work even if it didn't have 100 wins. The 100 wins just adds 3. But I could also maybe arsenal the 100 wins and wait for an opportunity where it can get a lot more value. Like if I have an Ancestral Harmony coming up, that Ancestral Harmony is going to be even better when I have the 100 wins paired with it. So sometimes these flexible cards that just give you your normal points worth of value can be saved for a time where they're able to multiply and go higher. One other thing I want to touch on really quickly before I wrap up my section is we're talking in this episode about how much a card is worth in hand, but there's a whole different equation you would use if you want to evaluate the worth of a card in deck. For instance, if I pitch a blue to play a 3 for 7 versus a 0 for 3 go again into a 0 for 4 with no go again, right? Both of those plays are worth 7 offensive value, but one of those plays puts something back into my deck. Is that something that is extra value added to my play? It could definitely be relevant later when my deck size is larger than my opponent's and I can keep going longer for fatigue math, right? I find myself thinking a lot about how much does my life lead convert to my deck size being lower and which one I would rather prefer, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, is it good that I have 5 more cards in deck than my opponent, even if I have 5 less life? Is that something that would balance like 1 for 1, you know? Because if each card is worth 3 value when I play it, I feel like that's not worth as much when it's in my deck, right? I'm not going to think like every card in my deck is going to get me another 3 offensive value, especially because it's not how we play cards, especially in the late game, you know?
Yeah. And of course, all of it depends on the ability of the cards and what the general game plan is, right? Aurora is going to be less concerned with pitching for offensive value because Aurora is just trying to rush you down before second cycle even happens, while other decks do care a lot about that second value and do care about pitching cards so that they're specifically available in those late game situations.
So just want to touch on it a little bit. Don't want to talk your ear off too much about this whole other concept, but I think I've said everything I want to warm up this concept of how much is a card worth. In Yellow Pitch and Blue Pitch, we're going to look at more specific examples for how you can convert cards into value. And I think we're going to start with Clark in Yellow Pitch.
Yeah. I have titled this pitch A Card from Hand because I was thinking about all the times that Flesh and Blood cards reference a card from hand, right? Discard, a card from hand. Banish, a card from hand. From your own hand, from the opponent's hand, right? Destroy their arsenal. What is that value? How do I evaluate that effect?
Yeah, like when New has her headpiece that says opponent has to banish a card from hand of their choice. Like, is it worth pitching an entire card to get that? Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much always. But it's so fascinating to me because it's so contextual. And I came to this conclusion. A card only has as much value as you can meaningfully convert. So for me, this is like the go again or the dominate effect from Bravo that you were referencing, Fuzzy, right? This idea of like 4 and 5 card hand synergies and whether or not a deck can actually use those. It is, you know, that idea of Victor of I want to be blocking with my block cards and the cards I don't need for my offense so that I can then get the maximum amount of value on my turn, right? But if you're ever in a position where the opponent isn't attacking you so you can't get those blocks off, or you don't have the right go again, or you don't have the right resources to be able to play the cards in your hand, it doesn't matter that you have a 4-card hand. You cannot meaningfully convert those cards into the value that you need. So I think this is why Go Again is one of the most important sources of value in the game, right? And we saw what happened when we went from Flesh and Blood 1.0 to Flesh and Blood 2.0, where in 1.0, LSS was like, everybody gets Go Again. Go Again for the whole turn. You pitch a yellow, all your shit has Go Again. Everything that says Illusionist at the bottom has Go Again. All your dragons have Go Again. They were fine giving Go Again to everything, and we saw how ridiculous that was.
Yeah.
And then as we moved to Flesh and Blood 2.0, they were like, ooh, that was a problem. That was way too much free value that we were dumping. That was letting too many decks convert their 5-card hands way too efficiently. We didn't put enough stopgaps on that so that decks would have to work harder to find their Go Again and utilize their Go Again. Sure enough, the decks that LL during that time had a lot of free Go Again. The decks that struggled during that time did not have the free Go Again. They had more hoops to jump through for those action points. And I think it's because of how efficiently you could convert a 5-card hand. I think block value also matters a lot in this, right? Because block value is another way of converting the value in your hand. Typically, cards are slated to give you better value offensively than defensively so that the game comes to a conclusion with a life point being reduced to 0. But the best decks I've noticed are able to block with their full hand and still be okay, or attack with their full hand and still be okay.
Yeah, that's a very powerful flexibility.
Yeah, that ability to just be like, here is all of my hand converted very efficiently into offense, or here's my whole hand converted very efficiently into defense. And obviously, there's always going to be things in the way of that, right? Sometimes the defensive deck has to pitch the sink below because the opponent didn't attack. It's just what happens. And those are their inefficient turns where you can try to find space as the opposing player. I want to take a moment now to talk about brute design, because I came up with this idea for the episode off of going through brute cards and being like, why do all these cards suck? Because so many of them just suck. And I was trying to figure out why these cards were printed the way that they were, and why has that not converted as Flesh and Blood has continued to develop into modern Flesh and Blood, right? Why does it feel like all the Welcome to Wraith cards are being left behind for Brutes, while a lot of Guardian cards, Ninja cards, are still relevant from that era? And I think it's because Brute design asks you to spend 3 cards on what is normally a 2-card hand. So Fuzzy, in your pitch, we talked about Command and Conquer and the 3-for-7s, right? The very basic 2-card hands. For Brute, we have those exact same 2-card hands, but as an additional cost, discard another card from hand.
Well, they're also a little bit stronger, right? Like you have Wrecker Romp is a 2-for-8 instead of a 2-for-6.
Yes, many of them are overvalued. But then there's also cards like Breakneck Battery, which is a 2-for-6, which is completely on rate. But if you discard a 6 card, it gains Go Again, right? Again, like you have to discard the 6 for the Go Again.
There's also no mode where you play this card without discarding. That's just not allowed. It's an additional cost.
It requires that 3rd card in hand. Now, like you said with Wrecker Romp, Fuzzy, they did try to offset that by giving a little bit additional value, and also by putting some value on the hero card. Reinar says whenever you discard a 6-powered card, intimidate the opponent. So if you think about Wrecker Romp, 2-for-6 is the baseline. They give it 2 additional power, 2 points of value, and then when you discard that 6, you intimidate as a potential 3rd point of value. Okay, well, there's the 3 value that you're hunting to get out of your additional card, right? It's supposed to line up nicely. It's supposed to give you that 3 value.
And that's like, it's easy to gloss over, but I think that's very radical to say Intimidate is worth 1 point, because Intimidate is hard to evaluate in and of itself.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Banish a card from the opponent's hand, but only for purposes of blocking.
Like, they get the card back. So they're not losing any value permanently, but they're losing flexibility. Flexibility isn't something that's very easy to codify.
Yes. But at the same time, that flexibility only really matters if the opponent was hoping to block with that card and now they can no longer.
Right.
Again, this idea of like if I'm playing against a victor and I banish their test of strength, I'm feeling godly.
Yeah.
But if I banish the red that they were planning on attacking with anyway, or the blue that they were going to put into their hammer, did I really just make that big of a difference in how their turn ends up looking? Not necessarily, right? So again, it's contextual, right? A lot of the times that these cards say a card from hand, it's extremely contextual about, well, what is the card? Who has the ability to choose the card? Succumb to Temptations is a very powerful Runeblade card because I, the attacking Runeblade, get to choose the card that gets discarded, whereas Mark of the Black Widow, the new assassin card, just lets the opponent choose which card gets banished, right? And is a much worse effect as a result. Both of them get rid of a card from hand. Clark, what are you talking about? They're both on hit, the opponent loses a card, but even still, the context of who chooses which card gets gone, that's a weird way of saying it, but if I, the attacker, or the blocker gets to choose, that makes a really big difference in terms of how easily the opponent can then convert on the cards in their hand.
Totally.
I've also hit with the Succumb and been like, it doesn't matter what I take here. These are all 0-for-4s with Go Again with Aurora. I'm getting 4 value regardless of which card I take here. But sometimes it really does matter because I see the one blue in their hand that they need to make something happen, or the one thing that gives their entire hand Go Again, and I go, oh, if I take that, I kill their hand.
Yeah.
And I destroy tons of value. So, yeah, it's a card, but what's the context of that card? And Brute has had this extremely long-term issue of having their value not actually be fairly realized. As the game has gotten older, we haven't had power creep in the way of numbers. Not necessarily, right? I mean, sure, there are more Arc Lightnings and Mordred Tides nowadays, cards that, with a lot of synergy and keeping a lot of cards in hand, can go far above what the value we expect a normal card to get. Would you guys agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Or like Illumina Ascension, right, Joel? Like, even going back as far as like 3 years ago, they were printing cards that can break the math of the game.
Definitely. Like there are a lot of cards that exist now that are not future proofed, and they may be banned or they're hindering a lot of design space now. And in the modern fab, they're also printing these same kinds of cards with Arc Lightning, where if you just keep this insane 5-card hand, the value just like quadruples or quintuples, you know?
But remember, there are also really, really good cards from Welcome to Wraith, even in the context of Brute. Bloodrush Bellows is a very strong card that has multiplicative value based on how many cards in hand you can keep while you play it. It's really fucking good, and it's one of the reasons why Brute is a playable class. It's all in that one card, you know? I think it is easy to look at old cards and be like, these were stinkers. We've clearly moved on from this design. I do think LSS is much better at not printing stinkers, but even then, there are some cards that like never see constructed play in Limited nowadays. So you have to be very careful when you're thinking about like which cards are the best ones to represent LSS's good and bad design, you know? Because there's a lot of different purpose behind different cards.
For sure. Sorry, I know I've pulled in a lot of examples from other classes when I wanted to stay more focused on Brute. Because all of this stemmed from my frustration with Brute design and where Brute design is going and why I think it really needs a modern Flesh and Blood overhaul. Needing 3 cards in hand to do what other heroes and other decks can do with 2 cards is a massive disadvantage.
Totally.
And when that value is baked into contextual things like Intimidate, it gets even worse. Wrecker Romp is not 9 value. It is barely even 8 value, in my opinion. Even though I know it's attacking for 8, because I had to spend a whole 3rd card for that 8 value. Mm-hmm. And 3 card 8 is not good. I think we also saw this in the Dusk to Dawn revamp of Levia, where they were trying to fix Levia's early game of not being able to play cards because you didn't have the cards in graveyard for the additional cost of banishing. So what they did instead was they printed cards that let you banish a card from hand. Hey, this is fine now, right? You get to like fill graveyard by attacking with the card. You get to turn off Blood Debt by banishing that 6-powered card in your hand, and you're still attacking, right? No. Why am I spending 3 cards to attack for 8 or for 9? That is not enough to compete in the modern day of Flesh and Blood, especially if I am not generating even more value out of that 3rd card. If it is only being converted into like 2 or 3 additional points of offense, or like overpower or dominate, that's just not enough value.
Yeah, I think LSS was trying to be conservative when it comes to how much value you can get for converting a random card, right? Like, you already have to do a little bit of work to make your cards worth 3 points. Like, you have to pitch a blue in a way where you get to use all 3.
Yes! Thank you, Fuzzy. I have to work to get my cards to give me 3 value.
And I think maybe they were afraid of, like, if any old card can just give me 3 points just for discarding it, then that might be, like, against the design they were trying to go for with the game.
Yes.
But I agree it kind of falls flat because it definitely feels like they wanted it to be worth 2 points, like an easy 2 points, but it also has the requirement of being a 6 for some reason. Like, if they wanted to turn any card into 2 points, that would be an okay design, especially because, like you said, they already have to have 3+ card hands just to make it work, you know?
Yeah, because it prevents us from being flexible in how we block.
Yeah.
We have to end up blocking with very, very particular cards. And I will say that the one time that Brute has really stepped into its own in modern Flesh and Blood was after heavy hitters with KO, because KO was able to build to the consistency in his blues so that all of the draw discard effects did actually generate that value that we're expecting, right? Bare Fangs is just a 2-card 2 for 8. Okay, that's playable. That's good enough.
It's also
for what we're trying to do.
It's also slightly better because it makes it a 2 for 9 because the might token you generate from discarding a 6 power.
Yeah, through delayed value, mind you, but very, very good point there, Joel.
Yeah, the might token is much closer to being a consistently easy to evaluate mechanic compared to Intimidate, which is a lot more based on context. Like you're saying.
Intimidates also get way better the more Intimidates you can stack, right? Also in a way that a lot of people have noted can be very, very toxic if they make Intimidating too good and too easy to obtain, right? If you, every single turn you're just facing get intimidate away your entire hand and then get hit for 20 and that happens twice, and the game's over, that fucking sucks. No one likes playing against that. But I think they are trying to fix this, and I think they're trying to fix it with Beat Chest. Beat Chest was the new mechanic printed in heavy hitters that essentially puts you into a, hey, you've discarded a 6 state, right? Mm-hmm. They needed a keyword for that, so they gave us Beat Chest. If you've already beat Chest, then all other cards with Beat Chest are considered already active. So a great example of this is, as an additional one, it's as an additional cost, you may. So now we no longer need that guaranteed third card in hand. It can just be a 2 for 6 or whatever, right? And then also, if we do beat Chest, then all other beat chests are active and they no longer need to discard that 6 for value. So it provides us that flexibility, because back in the day, I think it was a lot harder to find the go again pieces and to find the synergy pieces with a really limited card pool of Welcome to Wraith. And in that meta, being able to convert a random 6 in hand that you weren't going to attack with anyway into extra damage and an Intimidate, that was very, very good back then. But now that it's become easier to convert on big 5-card hands, now that there are more synergy pieces, those cards are just old and decrepit now. And this Beat Chest is their way of modernizing, I think, the discard an additional card from hand mechanic by saying, look, just do it once. So now you're trying to line up multiple Beat Chest cards together with a card that you're willing to discard.
Yeah, they just didn't quite print enough of them. I feel like all of that would be true if there were more of them.
Yeah, and Brute got like way more reprints in heavy hitters than every other class. So like it was an attempt at modernization, but they only really gave us 2 cards with Beat Chest on it. But if they print more cards with Beat Chest on it, I think it's only going to get better and better as this mechanic is modernized.
Assuming this is the direction they want to take, because I don't think the cards that have Beat Chest, obviously they weren't like the Majestics, and that's really where the power is going to come from when we get the next Brute draftable set. But this also isn't really a good litmus test for how these Beat Chest cards are going to interact with the rest of the Flesh and Blood metagame, because they're just not that good. It's just not that big of a leap in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. There was one other thing I wanted to mention with Leviah, and how I think one of the reasons Leviah is a slightly more attractive Brute to a lot of players is because we don't need that third card in hand. Instead, the extra value that we're getting is being banished from our graveyard. So we can have the 2-card Brute rates that are really nice.
That is much more flexible.
It allows for a lot more flexibility. We just now have this, the late game issue of having to play a card that banishes every single turn, and the early game issue of having to fill our graveyard, which I discussed earlier in this pitch. And then I also wanted to mention very, very briefly about Blasmafet and how Blasmafet and Arsenals operate with this kind of Brute design, which is in providing that more flexibility to let you better convert your whole hand. With Blasmafet Leviah Consumed, you can play 1 card from your Banish Zone. And you can, based on what you draw, you hope you have the toolbox in your Banish Zone to fit what you need. Do you have a lack of action points in your 4-card hand? Well, that's great. Play your Dread Screamer from Banish Zone. Now you have a way of converting your resource cards into action points and attacks. Do you just need a 1-card way of turning off Blood Debt because you need to block a lot? Well, that's completely fine. You have your Endless Maw for that, right? Just make sure you hold on to 1 blue. You can play your Endless Maw. And very similarly, being able to arsenal the right card does a similar thing for Brute and other classes as well, right? A lot of the time, it just lets you block with an additional card from hand. It lets you get that 3 block value and still present a 4-card offensive attacking value.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you got the opportunity to talk about Brute on the podcast today, Clark, because I know you've been meaning to talk about Brute for a long time. It's been in how can we fit this into an episode? And it's nice that we finally were able to get it done. It is so weird that all Brute cards are 2 for 6s. How are you supposed to play a 3-card hand and do a 2 for 6?
I don't know. They're also all 2 costs, which is hey, you can pitch a yellow, but guess what? Pitching a yellow for a 2-costed card isn't as much value as pitching a blue for a 3-costed card.
Yeah.
Wacky.
Are we about ready to move on to Blue Pitch?
Yeah.
Joel, what do you got for us?
So I wasn't feeling super inspired by this concept.
Especially because I took Brute from you.
Yeah, so like what else do I have to talk about? No, I'm just kidding. But I do. There have been a lot of very hot topics in our Discord and just in general of like cards that really break the mold and how we value cards. And so I named this section the good, the bad, and the charging.
Wait, Light Warrior? Oh, reliable.
Oh, reliable. When in doubt, just talk about Bolton. So let me just start off with Bolton. I think the way that he changes deck construction is very interesting because with his ability in most of his cards saying charge and Raid and Duskbane allowing you to basically gain 3 points of attack power every time you charge is very unique because it gives every card in your deck the opportunity to be worth 3 points. And typically yellows are only worth like 2 points. Like a lot of his Majestics operate on this way. And on the off chance that you're running blues for arcane matchups or for ice matchups, those can also be converted into 3 points. Now, this is a little bit harder with a lot of the more modern Bolton cards, requiring you to specifically charge a yellow card, but the OG charge cards don't really care about this, so that's just one way that I've noticed cards can have like really different values in certain archetypes, and I think Bolton does it probably the most consistent out of any deck. Like turning any card into 3 points is pretty powerful in my opinion.
We've seen with Brute that LSS seems afraid of designs that take that flexibility away from the cards or make them more flexible by giving you straight up points of value for chucking them, right? Like with Brute, you seem to only get about 2 points for chucking a card by discarding it. And with Bolton, you get 3 points per charging, right? That's more than you get for discarding. It almost makes me wonder if that's what they're so afraid of when it comes to Bolton getting really above rate charge cards.
Yeah, and I think as long as Bolton and his signature weapon is Raiden, he's going to be locked into yellow head jab tribal, which is not inherently a bad thing, but I think that's also why, like you said, they are staying away from giving him, number one, overrate charge cards, and also more Anthem effects, because the last one he got was via the Vanguard, and that's sort of like been really the only way we can go above this 3 point per card threshold. Not only in Flesh and Blood, but in Bolton specifically. Like as an aggro deck, you want to have these power fantasy turns where you go over the normal threshold of damage. And in Bolton, it's very few and far between. The next example that sort of goes more into like the manipulation of how we value cards is Shadow Runeblade. And I want to start off with Soul Shackle tokens, because this is the way that Chain was not only able to get 1 point of value for giving any action go again, but also the Soul Shackle tokens. Soul Shackle tokens say at the start of your turn, banish the top card of your deck, and whether that is a Shadow Runeblade card with Blood Debt or some other action card that you can't play out of banish is where the context comes in. But on the turns that you do banish Shadow Runeblade attack actions that say you can play this out of banish, you're essentially drawing a card for each Soul Shackle token that you have. And to me, that makes it really hard to evaluate Soul Shackle beyond that 1 point of value, even though in practice I've seen people draw like 4 or 5 cards off of it and kill me in one turn.
Yeah. Not to mention what Fuzzy was saying about the deck damage, right?
Yes.
And like how quickly you're ending the game by giving yourself that offensive extra draw.
Right. Like I remember some very talented people in the Flesh and Blood community would do the math on how many turns it would take for you to hit your pitch stack like 5 turns early if you create a Soul Shackle token every single turn. And in that way, people can manipulate second and third cycles of games. They can have their pop-off turns like way earlier, and deck thinning is very real in Flesh and Blood. And while we don't have a Shadow Runeblade right now that can create Soul Shackle tokens in CC, we do have another one with an equally absurd card with Vincent and Cole.
Yeah.
And to me, Cole, I predicted that this card would make her shoot up to S tier at some point. And while I don't think she's like the best deck in format, she's still a force to be reckoned with, not only with the regular disruption in her core cards, but Cole, I think specifically, especially with like Arc Lightning turns or Kodachis or just go wide decks in general, that first point of damage, you're now being threatened of losing an extra card to Cole, and also fueling Vincent's offensive ability on the subsequent turn. So to me, this card is like a perfect example of like how it's hard to evaluate cards in these circumstances.
Yeah, it's super contextual. It will always banish a card from the opponent's hand, and that's always very good. In fact, a red card that just says, play this, banish a card from the opponent's hand, good enough. I like that as a 1-card hand. But, like, if you can stack it in Blood Debt, it's like, it's that free ability to just take away a card from the opponent's hand on a big power turn. Or you can use it when you have a card in hand to give yourself that second Rune Gate card in Banish Zone to then attack with a second Rune Gate card.
Right. Pretty interesting.
Super, super interesting.
Next, I think, is probably the most controversial card in our Discord so far, Codex of Frailty. My personal least favorite card in all Flesh and Blood.
Wow.
I'm so happy you have this card here because when I also pitched this idea, for me it was all about Brute.
Right.
And the very next thing was Codex of Frailty is just a card, the card.
Yes,
right?
yes.
The opponent gets a card, then they have to discard a card, and then you get a Ponder token, which lets you draw a card after you get a card, right? Like, there's just so many contextual card values flying around with this.
Yeah, and there's sort of consensus, at least in my own head, is that Codex of Frailty is it can pretty easily reach a 0 for 10 point threshold, and that is, number one, getting the card of your choice, and also discarding a card from your opponent's side, because the way that I've heard it explained is a card in hand defensively can be 3 points, but offensively it would be 4 points. So if you take the offensive perspective, it could be 4 points, but even as a defense, it would be taking away 3 points of value from your opponent's hand. And the Ponder token, that's a little bit harder to evaluate, I think, because you can draw duds. But I think resetting Arsenal is pretty clutch, especially in Assassins who like to convert these larger 5-card hands for like a monstrous, Bonds of Agony turn or whatever. But so if you consider that 3 points, that's another 3 points for a total of like 10. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I can go through it step by step, maybe. You play Codex of Frailty and you get Leave No Witnesses. You attack. You are attacking for 4 value and then removing the card that they got to put into their arsenal, which is, like you said, Joel, 4 value. So there's 8. And then your Ponder token triggers giving you a random card to put into arsenal, which lets you use the base standard of 3. Now we're at 11.
Yeah, so 10 or 11 is like the baseline, not including if you hit with Leave No Witnesses and banish the card that they picked, which is another like 3 points of value. So all that being said, there's a lot of turning points in where this card can get way over the threshold of points we can expect from one singular card. And the reason why I think it's so relevant is because this card still exists in the post, like, quote-unquote book burning, because it has Ponder tokens, which is like draw cards light, and also the discard from your opponent's side, sort of like this uninteractable discard.
Yeah, with the book burnings, they really were trying to be really specific as to what they're hitting, right? Because Codex of Frailty, while it gives you a shit ton of value, no question, it doesn't usually translate into offensive overlap. Like, Codex of Frailty isn't the kind of card that allows you to swing like 5 or 6 attacks wide on the same turn, in the same way that Art of War kind of was able to do that.
Yeah, it doesn't let you kill your opponent, but it does let you generate enough value to be a turning point in the game.
Definitely. I will throw this out for the people who like Codex of Frailty. Well, obviously everyone likes it, but the people who like are Ranger players and use Codex of Frailty, this doesn't really apply so much to them because Assassin players are never not grabbing Leave No Witnesses unless they can convert it into CNC. Yeah. So that's a very big point, or a very big distinction, because Leave No Witnesses is like a big part of the equation. Like, that's always going to be 4 for the attack, more if they hit your opponent after a Codex of Frailty. So I just want to give that distinction.
Being able to grab that Arsenal disruption, meaning that the discard and then get a card from Arsenal is no longer the equal exchange that it looks like it is.
Right.
And of course with High Seas, we don't know. Ranger could get Arsenal disruption and then they could start doing very similar plays.
Oh man.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about Codex of Frailty. I didn't want to get too negative with it because this card gives me a lot of big emotions. So I'm going to move right past it. The next card I want to talk about is also, or was at the top of a lot of controversy in Strides of Reprisal, which if you're not familiar, it's a Mystic Ninja leg equipment that blocks for 1 with Blade Break. And when you defend, you put a Crouching Tiger into your hand. And this card was used to great effect because you would use this card as essentially as Art of War fodder. You play Art of War and you banish an attack action to draw 2 more cards. Whoop-de-doo, Crouching Tiger is a fucking attack action. And so in this way, it sort of really changes how we define a card, because when Zen was on his Reign of Terror, a lot of people were asking to either have Art of War banned, me included, or have Strides of Reprisal being like choice banned with Art of War, in that you can't use the two in the same deck. Because generating a Crouching Tiger as Zen is very important, because it lets you do Chase the Tail, you can buff it with Tiger Taming Akara, and you combo with like Tiger Swipe, things like that. But in this case, it's sort of the competitive player finding a way to break a mechanic and use this fake attack action as fodder so that the rest of your turn is extremely juiced with, Art of War. And this is also with like Descendant Gustway and Bonds of Ancestry. So there's a lot of context there, but the fact that they used an attack action that's like not really an attack action to fuel other attack actions was a little... I don't know if there was a lot of testing around that specifically.
No, I love it, because Fuzzy has done plays into me before where like he blocks with 3 cards, leaving an Enlightened Strike in hand, and then also blocking with his Strides of Reprisal, getting that Crouching Tiger, and then using it as sync fodder to the Enlightened Strike. So it was like he blocked with 3 cards and then threw a 1-card 7 at me.
Yeah.
He didn't really, right? Because he still had to generate a card, but that card, the A card of value that we expect 3 value from, was a Crouching Tiger, which it in of itself cannot generate 3 points of value,
right?
Unless it hits synergies with these other cards.
Yeah, such a good talking point. Crouching Tiger is literally just a card, and
it's a card with a name.
Yeah, it's got a name. Yeah, and how much value can that be worth? Apparently, a lot. And Art of War like really abused that. It was crazy. Those were kind of fun times.
It was like I don't often get the opportunity to play the most oppressive, disgusting deck, and so I'm not gonna lie, I see the appeal. Games were extremely easy to win when that combo was around, but I'm glad it's gone.
I also kind of want to say, while we're talking about Ninja, Bonds of Ancestry, a very recently banned card, also kind of felt like this, because it was, okay, if you've done this big combo quest, then you can get a card with combo, right? So long as you had a card of the same name in graveyard. So it was just a card, right? Like you're just getting a card's worth of value. That's 3 value, right?
Yeah, nothing conspicuous there.
But it's a card with a name.
Oh.
Right. And that changed the whole context of it in the purpose of the game.
Do you think Bonds would be fair if it was like banish a card without combo to find a card without combo?
No, because then they just get Snatch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think anytime a 0 for 4 can just get you a free 0 for 4, it's pretty nutty.
Yeah. The last card I want to talk about is Endless Arrow. Now, at face value, you see this card, okay, it costs 0, it blocks for 3, and it swings for 4. However, there's a sneaky line of text that says, when this hits, you return it to your hand.
Ooh, card advantage on hit?
Yep. So it's sort of like Snatch, where you get a card, but you know the card that you're getting, and in that way, this card could either be Wounding Blow, or it could be Wounding Blow EX, Gigantamax, Super Evolve. Anyways, the point is, a lot of people have called this card to be banned when Lexi was especially popular, because, well, I don't think anyone's complaining about this, but you could essentially use it to clear all of Dromai's dragons, because each hit, you just clear a dragon, you put it back in an arsenal with New Horizons, and then you get a second arsenal.
That sounds so satisfying.
Yeah. I wish I had that opportunity.
Oh my god, I wish I could just fire the same exact arrow at every dragon.
But also, like, if you have Art of War and Rain Razors, each each instance of Endless Arrow is swinging for 7 on hit, return to hand. And
especially with Rain Razors being a surprise, you can play it as an instant and reactions.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of people were calling this to be banned because it essentially has infinite value. As long as you get to hit, you get to keep it. To me, that seems really, really strong. And the only reason why it hasn't been banned is because it's been sort of amplified by all these Art of War effects, Rain Razor effects.
And those all just got banned.
And those all, well, not Rain Razor specifically, but Art of War just got banned. And I think with this new modern fab, they're looking to take away action points from Rangers specifically, especially with like the new Marlin spoilers. Doesn't seem like she's going to be going extremely wide with cards outside of Golden Harpoon. So I don't know. What do you guys think about this card?
I think it was meant to be the weapon for Ranger, right?
Yeah.
That was its initial purpose, was like Ranger has this major issue of not having the weapon, of not having that source of endless value to help in the fatigue battle, right? And that was very important. I think Salvage Shot was also printed in the exact same set.
It might have been.
Which on hit goes to the bottom. Again, another attempt at helping Rangers deal with this fatigue and this issue of not having a source of endless value. Thus, Endless Arrow.
It's so funny how like Flesh and Blood has good cards and better cards.
Yeah.
Like Searing Shot is a good card. It's like nowhere near as good as like Endless Arrow. You know what I'm saying?
Because Endless
So
Arrow
true.
is a 0 for 4 that becomes a 0 for 4 that becomes a 0 for 4 that becomes a 0 for 4. It is an endless snatch.
Yeah. I also like the Ranger design where like they can have busted cards because they don't have a weapon. Like cards are going to be above rate, and the only thing that's above rate about Endless Arrow is the on hit is a very strong on hit, you know?
Which lets you have Endless Arrow again. But at the exact same time, if you then end up drawing a bunch of arrows that you would much rather attack with because they have debilitating on hits and ways of disrupting the opponent, well, then that Endless Arrow is gumming up your arsenal, and you don't want it in there anymore. You want to load other arrows into there.
Right. I think there's a lot of contextual factors from Ranger itself, more so than like some other cards that we've talked about so far, because obviously hitting infinitely seems really strong at face value, but just hasn't translated in the same way as of yet. But that's really all the cards I wanted to talk about. I understand that there are a lot of cards that bend the way that we evaluate, you know, turn by turn value or points gained per card. And if you think you have ones that you'd like to talk about, drop it in our Discord, drop it in the YouTube. But I think with that, we're going to go to our Arsenal Zone.
Sweet. Our Arsenal Zone is the part of our podcast where we each shout out a card that we've been thinking about lately for whatever reason we want. And we're going to start with a suggestion from our Patreon members. All of our Patreon members, right? We like to do one of these every episode. Today, we are randomly going to pick Dice Roll Noise. Bwipy! Let's go!
Bwipy has been consistently suggesting cards for a while now, and I think at this point, Bwipy has suggested months worth of cards.
Yeah, so for the next 14 months, we're just going to do Bwipy cards. No, I'm just kidding.
But we are pulling, again, we had to record this ahead of time, so this is one of Bwipy's older suggestions in terms of what's in our Discord. But Bwipy suggested Rapid Fire, which says, until end of turn, arrows you control have Go Again, and it reloads, and it itself is in action with Go Again. Bwipy says, this card plus Tri-Shot plus 3 of a kind is going to make an absolutely disgusting aggro build on Marlin when she drops, unless one of these 3 pieces gets yoinked.
Banned.
And I have a feeling that out of all of them,
is that Australian for banned?
Yeah, we should ask him.
and I have a feeling that out of all of them, Rapid Fire will be shot in the head. If only because Tri-Shot will only be great with 3 of a kind and Death Dealer, and with Azalea on her way out, it's likely that she will LL shortly after Marlin drops, so this won't need to exist for a very long time. Great suggestion, Bwipy. Also, in case you guys don't know, Bwipy is another Flesh and Blood content creator.
Yeah.
So shout out to Bwipy's channel. Bwipy does a lot of comedy on his channel specifically, which I've always really, really liked his videos. Always very funny, very snappy videos. Very, very good.
Yeah, I believe he's on YouTube with the same handle, so be sure to check him out if you have some free time.
Yeah.
And I'll probably put it in the description.
Oh. But yeah, thank you for the suggestion. I personally think Rapid Fire is also going to be really good because the gold fin harpoon that Marlin can create with her hero ability looks really strong. Like even if it's a 0 for 2, rapid fire being able to give it go again, so that if you're able to maybe stack a couple of these harpoon generation cards all in one hand, and you just slam them with like rapid fire or
A big game shot.
a big game trophy shot, then I think this card could easily be a staple in Marlin, especially if it's a heavier pitch curve. Like a yellow can pitch for one of the big 2-costed arrows. So great shout. I think that'll definitely be a contender for Marlin builds.
It seems like what Ranger is going to struggle with the most, and with all of Marlin's ability to get like a lot of reloads off, the go again seems like the biggest issue for her.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be how efficiently can she work go again into her kit.
Yeah.
And to best utilize all those reloads off of all of her draws.
Yeah, and I think rapid fire is like the perfect place to start. Like obviously just giving everything go again. Rainware's just buffing everything. Seems strong.
Yeah, I got to return to that Fab 1.0 go again cards.
Very much so. Yeah, this was printed in Arcane Rising. So great shout out, Bwipy. It's a card to keep your eye on. This is also, you want to know what we haven't talked about, guys?
What's that?
Special rarities.
I love the super rare cards.
Yeah, the super rare cards. This is one of those super rare cards. Just a neat little thing. It was only really a thing for that one brief little blip in LSS history, and this is one of the cards that got given that very narrow power space.
And I've been a pretty big advocate for LSS making the return of super rare cards. I think
Have you? I don't think I've heard you mention super rare cards.
Really?
Holy fuzzy, the fucking aggro.
I've mentioned it on the podcast, and I mentioned it in person like a non-zero amount of times.
Oh, non-zero. Okay.
Yeah.
Non-zero.
There we go.
Yeah. But it is
Big advocate.
it is a strong belief of mine that they should bring back super rare cards because they fit a niche that the bowl of soup that Majestics have been becoming they just don't hit the same, because it's cards like this that are hard to evaluate, whereas Majestics, like, you sort of break the math sometimes, and sometimes it's just like a 2 for 8 with Swing Big or something. And super rare like bridges that gap in a unique way.
I wouldn't mind if there starts being more super rares, and super rares also exist in the Majestic slot. That way you can get like a rare and a super rare, or a rare and a Majestic.
Yeah.
Increase the sort of power level of an average pack just by that little bit. All right. Bwipy, thank you for the suggestion. Thank you so much for suggesting every week as reliably as you have been.
Yeah.
It's been really great seeing you in the Discord, man.
Yeah, the rest of you need to look at Bwipy as a point of inspiration. Be sure to tune in and drop your suggestions. And if you're not a part of the Patreon, feel free to join, because we might talk about a card that you've been really excited about.
Yeah. All right, we're going to get into our 3 cards that we've selected for the Arsenal Zone. Fuzzy, would you like to start off?
Absolutely. So Florian won a calling lately. Again, by the time this comes out, it might be a little bit more of a old news because it was a while ago for you guys.
I think I know the card.
But I'm kind of excited to start going back to armories and playing more Florian. I want to put this list together. I mean, I need to get like canopy shelters and broccolis. But anyway, one of the cool cards that Florian's have been including lately with the release of the Hunted is Trot Along.
Yeah.
Trot Along is a 0-cost generic non-attack action, is color locked at blue and blocks for 3. It says that your next attack with 3 or less base power this turn gets go again, and Trot Along itself has go again. So lots of non-attack pumps or buffers only affect attack action cards, but Trot Along can give a weapon go again. It was printed in a set where you could give like your dagger go again and then swing with 2 daggers or something. But Reaping Blade, which is Florian's go-to weapon right now, is a 3 or less base weapon. So Trot Along can give Reaping Blade go again. Now, go again being evaluated at 1 point, it's not necessarily good to play an entire card just to get a point's worth of value. But where this comes up is hand conversion. Florian does not play a lot of attacks with go again. So being able to turn this into 3 go again off the 1 resource it takes to swing Reaping Blade, and then follow it up with something like Plow Under, or maybe
CNC, Weakest Link.
Yeah, those are good for like 3-card hands, but you could even take like your 4-5-card hand, which Florian is normally like, what the fuck do I do with a 4-5-card hand? But you could pitch a blue to play Trot Along into Reaping Blade, then Grasp, and then with another blue play Felling of the Crown. That would be a really big turn, because you not only get an extra 5 damage on top of your Felling is already a threat in and of itself, right? So you're definitely getting a full 5-card hand's worth of value for playing a hand like that.
Yeah, when the value of a card is determined on how well you can convert.
Wait, I think that'd be a 4-card hand. pitching 2 blues and playing a trot along, and then felling
And
the
felling,
crown.
it's 5.
Felling, pitching 2 blues, trot along.
Trot, 2 blues, felling. Oh.
Listeners, Clark just held up his hand, held up 4 fingers, and then stared at it, confused.
All right, you're at 3 minutes, Fuzzy. Wrap up your fucking section. We need to make our arsehole zones quicker.
So that's my card, and I brought a copy to sign and hand to each of you.
Yay!
Thank you, Fuzzy.
Thank you, Fuzzy.
Sign it, bitch. Fuck. I'll sleeve it up later.
Clark, what about you? What's your card?
My card is Eradicate.
Oh.
I love this card.
Eradicate is a part of a cycle of Majestics from when Arachne Huntsman was released. I've been thinking about Arachne Huntsman as I've been testing out a little bit of Assassins, right? I've been testing out Slippy, I've been testing out Marionette, seeing if Assassin's the direction I want to go for this upcoming meta. And honestly, I found such a massive disconnect between the contract cards and the stealth cards. They haven't found a way of marrying these 2 card pools. Arachne Huntsman just feels so old in their design. But Eradicate is a very interesting one to me because it doesn't give you the value on your turn. It gives you the value in the fatigue battle, right? This was something that Fuzzy was talking about in Red Pitch, and we decided to save to maybe discuss more in depth later. I also know that we've talked about cards in deck when we discussed our life gain episode. I know we talked about it way back in episode 1 when we discussed control archetypes. But deck damage is a very interesting and powerful effect, especially when you can sometimes hit some of those really, really big Majestics. Throwing an Eradicate, pumping it up to like 13 in the way that Assassin Tax can get nowadays. Like,
Oh, yeah.
and
Like a 1 for
banishing,
200.
and like banishing like half their deck. Like, I think this is a sneaky card that if they ever really start to give the support that we've seen for stealth to contract, spike to the levels that we've already seen Leave No Witnesses and Surgical Extraction hit. It's just a matter of like, how relevant will those random banishes be? Because guess what? The value of a card, when it's just a card, is pretty nebulous. But when it's 1 card for every single damage dealt, pretty big. So yeah, my card's Eradicate.
Fantastic.
Joel, what about you?
We're all eager.
Yep. For my card, I want to talk about Perch Grapplers. Perch Grapplers, for those of you who don't know, is a 2-block blade break equipment leg piece that says for an action and 2 resources, you can destroy Perch Grapplers, and until end of turn, face up arrow cards played from Arsenal gain Go Again, with Go Again. So Bwipy and I were kind of on the same wavelength in terms of how Marlin is going to play, because I was looking at Goldfin Harpoon and I'm like, okay, 0 for 2 sounds great. You create it out of thin air, but this still needs Go Again. And unless you're running Snapdragon Scalers, which is like a one-time use of Go Again, I think this card's going to be pretty underrated. However, if Marlin does end up being like this higher costed arrow ranger, like with Battering Bolt and the big shark attack action thing, you probably have enough lying around to pay 2 more to give arrows Go Again. And with a reload ability, it just makes a lot of sense that you'd want more ample access to Go Again. So in a pinch, you can just crack Perch Grapplers, give all your arrows Go Again. You can have some of the classics like Endless Arrow, Goldfin Harpoon, and then maybe like Battering Bolt with Go Again. I don't know. There's a lot of really good tools in Ranger so far, and I'm excited to see if Marlin can use Perch Grapplers in the future.
Yeah. And you know what? I think like a New Horizons Marlin build, giving everything Go Again and then like ending on a snatch. Whoo, that's a really, really
Snatch
good
in a
ability.
Ranger deck. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what are you going to do with that last arrows Go Again? You
Snatch
got to
is like-
follow it up with something.
The quintessential like turn ender snatch. I love it.
Yeah, 0 for 4 draw a card.
Yeah.
Love the shout.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's the end of our podcast as well. So if you've enjoyed your time here, feel free to join the Patreon or Discord. Remember, that's the only place you can get high C spoilers.
Yeah, come on our Discord and ask Joel and Clark how Europe is.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. I mean, you're just doing London, right?
Yeah, so I'll save you some time. Bad food.
No, the first meal I ever had in London was this little Jamaican curry spot, and it was incredible.
Oh, yeah, I was thinking more of like the classic UK food, like
Yeah, but like
pie mash.
London's like not even England, though, is the thing that that's like what a lot of Londoners say nowadays.
yeah, like a lot of like I think Indian food
Oh, yeah.
modern Indian food kind of was like birthed out of like London.
Yeah,
Indian
because
immigrants.
colonization.
Yeah.
Very, very much so. A lot of these multicultural centers keep being in places of intense colonization. I wonder how that works.
But yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good day.
Until next one, guys. Bye.
Bye. Pitch It To Me podcast is hosted by Fuzzy Delp, Clark Moore, and Joel Recinos. Our executive producer is Talon Stradley. Logistics coordinator, John Farkas. Music by Dillon Hulse. Logo by Han V. And sound mixing by Christopher Moore. Last but not least, we'd like to thank you, the listener. Thank you for tuning in. Please give us a follow on your favorite social media platform at Pitch It To Me Podcast.